All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear sisters. Today we have a bit of a different kind of meeting for Mommy Mondays. This is the interview you guys have been requesting with my son. So let's get started. So we're just going to try to do about 15 questions. Let's see how long it takes us, inshallah. And nothing has been really prepped. We're just, we went over the questions like, he looked at the questions before, but we didn't prep the answers. So it's going to be as authentic as it gets. All right. So starting with the first questions, can you introduce yourself to my audience, to my group of mommies, inshallah?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Abdullah. I am 19 years old. I am currently a second year in university. And yeah, that is my life at this moment in time.
What are you doing for university and where do you live currently?
I currently live in Windsor, Ontario, which is in Canada. And in university, I am doing flight training.
Okay, so you're studying to become a pilot, inshallah. All right, just
Inshallah.
kind of the background. And you're currently visiting us in the UAE. So this is why we're doing the interview. It took us a little while to figure out the logistics of recording this meeting. All right, so I think the most interesting part about this whole thing is that you have been homeschooled your whole life. You've never been to school, and now you're second year
Yes.
university. So these are the kind of questions we get a lot of times. Can you tell us from your perspective, what was your educational path like?
Prior to getting to university, I have
Yeah,
never been
like
in a
like from your
classroom for
childhood.
academic purposes ever. Primary school, secondary school, high school, all that kind of stuff. So I've been homeschooled my whole life, ever since I was a wee little lad, ever since I was a boy. Uh, so since kindergarten, all throughout grade 12, high school, never sat in a classroom once, and that has been my journey throughout.
Did
And
you
it's been an
attend a
interesting experience.
homeschooling? Did you attend like a homeschooling program? Were you part of an online school?
Uh, I was
Like,
part of an online school for secondary school, for high school, as
okay,
part of an American curriculum. So they gave us a set program to do each year and requirements to fulfill up to their standards so that I could graduate with a diploma, right?
okay,
But in general, other than secondary school, nothing much of a program outside of that. We did have a lot of homeschool groups, a lot of homeschool like initiatives with other homeschoolers, but that was more of an independent thing, nothing to do with actual school. It was
okay.
more of an organized, a community-like thing, right?
Okay, so you were not part of like an online, because these are the type of questions I get, what kind of online program are you using? So we were not part of an
Yeah,
online.
I was never a part of those IGCSE online school programs that went from whatever 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. or any of that kind of thing. It was all self-taught to an extent, always through like other means. It was never through a dedicated program, which was practically just school but at home, right?
Okay,
What
so
I've done is more homeschooling and unschooling, which is, a mix of both, doing regular education at home, but also introducing a lot of different learning aspects as well.
okay. The program we used for your latter years, or since you were grade 4 or 5, just for the reporting purposes, is Clonlara. They're based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And basically, just this is for the moms, just kind of the
That
background.
would that would just give, yeah, basically the whole purpose of that was to give us a record of what we've done and to basically log our journey through academia, because otherwise a record would not exist for me, right? Otherwise I'd just be off the grid for X many years, and how do we have proof that he's done anything at all, even though I have done my own way of education, right?
Okay,
So
so yeah.
Clonero has been used throughout, yeah.
Okay, so basically we use Clonlara mostly for high school. We've used it in elementary as well, but the main benefit of using Clonlara comes in high school because they log your credits and, they issue a transcript at the end of your schooling. Now, as far as your high school, you kind of pursue your own interests there, like you had weird credits, different things. So this is the freedom kind of homeschooling gives you. But basically, for the purpose of this conversation, you've never attended a traditional schooling program, like you
Never
were
once.
part of like
Never been
grade
in a
1, grade 2,
classroom as
nothing.
part of a classroom. Never. No. I've never
How
gone
did you
to
feel
a
about that growing up?
regular school.
I mean, did you know you were homeschooled? What are your memories of that?
Well, I knew I was different. I knew that I didn't go to school, and I knew we had, certain times of the day where we did random tasks or activities. I remember specifically when I was younger back in Canada, about 7 or 8 years old, we would just randomly do math throughout the day. Little, grade 1, grade 2 math. We would do some Qur'an, like memorization, Juz Amma. We would do math, a little English, do some reading eggs online, some simple computer games that could help your learning. It was never a set task. I knew it was different ever since I would have friends outside that would meet either through community things or whatnot, and they would go to school each day, and I would not, right? And as I grew older, I learned more and more that I'm a bit different, not going the normal way. Um, but in general, it's been an interesting experience, not being in school, and you definitely realize it. Personally, I'm more of an introverted person, and this might have been mentioned here and there. So I like my solitude to an extent. So for me, school was not something that I felt I missed out on. There were certain aspects that were kind of appealing, like to a young boy's mind, right? Oh yeah, you have a structure, you can meet friends, you got a teacher, but like a principal. And in hindsight, it was more of a feeling kind of left out. Oh yeah, I don't have a school experience, right? I don't have the lunch cafeteria. I don't have the friends, the bullying, the funny stories, the detention, and all these kind of little quirks and things, PE and all these periods and whatnot. But in general, now I look back on it, that really it doesn't matter at all, right? For me, at least, I've never felt left out of the education system because I've always liked being alone, and I felt especially nowadays, I recognize how valuable it was that I didn't go to school because if I were, especially with my personality, I would have realized that it would have been really detrimental to how I developed and how I perceive certain things today, right?
Mm.
So yeah.
So it wouldn't have been that great to be in that school system, but you don't share like the common cultural commonalities. Hey, how was it during recess? And how was it in school? That kind of stuff. Like,
It's basically like even to this day, it's been a big topic of conversation because for a lot of people, school has been their whole life, right? So I missed out on connecting with some people because of that factor. Like just right now in university, in the small town that I go to school at for university, a lot of people there ask you, okay, so university or which high school did you go to, right? And I answer, well, I'd actually go to high school. I went to an online different thing. I did unschooling, homeschooling. And meanwhile, they've all gone to XYZ school that they all know of. And oh yeah, how was your school? Oh, do you know X teacher? X friend? YZ person? The experience? And they bond over that or they share over that. And for me, I find like that I didn't have those experiences. The benefits outweigh the cons, right? Of
mm,
not going to school. I think that it depends on person to person, but in general, I feel like I benefited way more from not going to school than actually going to school.
okay. Just again to give a little bit of background to the ladies, and they know me, but maybe if they hear it from you, what's kind of the cultural background? Where have you lived? Where were you born? What has been your experience? What's your nationality? All those kind of questions, because a lot of people feel like they want to relate to us, but then they just kind of want to know more about it. So where were you born? Where have you lived? What was your experience growing up?
So I am Bosnian descent. My parents are both Bosnian. I was born in Chatham, Kent, Ontario, which is a town away from Windsor by a few hours. The town is just south of Toronto by about 2 hours as well. I was born in Chatham, Kent. I grew up in Windsor, small town in Canada, for about 7 or 8 years. Then I moved to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Lived there till about 2013, so maybe about 4 or 5 years. Then from then on, moved to UAE to finish up my high school. So from 2013 to 2019, I stayed in UAE. I usually for travel, I've been to Bosnia either every other year or every year in recent years, or every so often. We always go back to see family. And in general, I've always been around the place, right? I never really had a secure home or secure place to live at. I know people back in Windsor who've lived in the same house for 20 plus years. I have never had that. I've always been moving around. The longest I've stayed at a place is maybe 5 years or 6 years, right? But it's always a new change that happens here or there.
So it's a lot of mix of cultures. So you spent a little bit of your childhood in the West. Now you're in the West. You spend majority of your schooling or growing up years in the Middle East, either Saudi Arabia or United Arab Emirates, and then the summers we would usually spend in Bosnia. So that's kind of like a mix of three things. How do you identify yourself? Like what is
I
your identity?
really don't know.
Are you
I
Bosnian?
really don't know.
Are
I
you
am, well, I am originally Bosnian. Like my descent is Bosnian. My ethnicity per se is Bosnian, right? Canadian nationality, that's my passport. That is what, the diplomatic answer. Like if they're asking for government related reasons, I am Canadian. I have a passport from Canada, right? But uh, at heart, I believe I'm Bosnian, but when I go back to Bosnia, I am not really Bosnian. I am still
You don't fit in.
I'm still a foreigner to Bosnians. Yeah, so it's always a mix of things. I'm what they call a third culture kid, right? So if you Google that term, it means someone who's been displaced by living in different places or having a different background. Let's say their parent is from one location and the other parent is from a different location, and they marry, they have kids, and the kids are now also displaced in a third location. So it's just a bunch of mixing of identity and self-identity and reflection. So the kids end up not knowing who they are or what they are or where they fit in, like in society, right? So I am sort of on that same boat where, I'm Bosnian by blood, but I grew up in Canada for a bit. I moved to the Middle East, and Middle East is completely different. And each country is a lot different than the next. And it's a big mix and mash of different culture, different ideas, different societies, different upbringing, different values. And it's just a big pot of stuff that's,
Mm.
all mixed up.
Do you think homeschooling has helped you with that sort of identity crisis, or like has it,
Definitely, definitely.
you
I've
have been in
realized more and more
school,
that,
how would it?
it's helped tremendously because if, let's say, for example, if I were in school, I would have to be moving around constantly. I would have to be moving on to new schools here and there. I would never be kind of in a solidified state. But with homeschooling, it's very fluid. It's like, you do math in X location, you do math in Y location, right? I'm doing math same as I was back when I was 7, 8 years old back in Canada. Then I did math again in UAE with the maybe like an upgrade textbook, right? So the general gist of learning and like the experiences you have also, it really helps you widen your world perception, right? In Canada, you could do certain activities. Like I remember back in the winter when I was younger, when I was when I was 9, 10 years old, I would go slow tobogganing, right? So you would take like a small sled and you'd go down a hill of snow. And that was an experience that really you could not have in UAE, right? In Bosnia, it's also different. In Bosnia, you could do many things that they have in nature. They have mountains. They have different things. You can go cave exploring, right? In Canada or UAE, that's really not possible, like in some areas, right? So it's really given me a broader view and perspective on what I can learn and do, and it's enabled me to experience more things than I thought I would have, like initially. If I stayed in Canada, I would have missed out on these experiences from UAE and Bosnia, vice versa. And also, it really comes to the point where a kid feels included, especially growing up. I've actually read this article recently where there was a kid who talked about how he grew up, but every single year he changed schools because his dad was traveling for work, right?
Mm.
And he said from his perspective, that was really detrimental to his mental health and his being in general because he would, let's say, move from America, he'd go to Europe, he would stay in Germany for one year, then he would move to the Middle East for one year, he would move somewhere else for one year. And every time he moved, he felt like his heart was torn apart because he made new friends, he made a solidified state a bit, and then it would all just get all demolished in one time, and he'd have to start over again in a new place, a new environment. And as some people know, school can be a very tough place to adapt, right? And if you're growing and developing at a new school every year, that is really draining on yourself and your self identity and who you are as a person, right? So I've realized more and more as I grew up that, if I were to have been in school during these travel times and during moving places, it really would have possibly really messed with me in a not so good way.
This way, home was home and homeschooling was always the same no matter where we were. We kind of kept our own family kind of thing. Well, that
Basically,
kind of,
home was not identified by the external factors too much, right? It wasn't like, oh yeah, home is where the school is, or home is where X, Y, Z thing is. It's more home is like where the family is and where we do things and where we just,
and it's always
where we
kind of
live,
the
right?
same no matter the location. We kind of had the same rules and things like that.
Basically.
That kind of goes, into the next question. When you look back at your childhood, what were sort of the highlights? What were the good memories? Like, whether it's a thing that you remember, not just from the homeschooling experience, but like growing up, what stands out? Like, wow, that was really cool, or I really enjoyed that. What was like a good memory from your childhood?
There's quite a few to pick from, but in general, it was a lot of these memories that all combine into making a bigger memory of childhood. Like I think the vast experiences that you can experience with certain aspects of living, like in homeschooling or whatnot, that I was blessed to have. I remember one time when I was about 6 years old, we had this homeschooling gathering in one of our houses, and we had this scientist hired for a few hours,
Mm.
and he actually taught us experiments right in the living room, which was super cool to see. He would shrink an egg, and the egg would fit into a tube that is super small, and it would somehow shrink because of the heat that he enabled, and it was really cool to see. And that was, I think, a really highlight in my young age, where he could do magic tricks that were all science related, and it really sparked my interest in, oh yeah, how does chemistry work? How does biology work? How does physics work? How is it possible that the egg can shrink that much, or how is it possible that it can't escape after it's cooled? I think that was one experience that, as a kid, you don't really get to experience otherwise. It's possible in school, but I don't think, it's just the environment that it was in, right? It was not like,
Like a mad
it
science
wasn't like I was
lab.
at school. It was men's science class, but it was not really science class. It was more like he just came to our house, he visited for a bit, and all of a sudden, wow, it's like in our living room, and then we had dinner after that. It was like, cool, right? But
Okay.
yeah, that
That's
was
that
one
was one of the
memory there.
experiences. This is actually for the moms, involved, because he remembers it from his kid perspective. This was when we were about to leave Windsor, so it was kind of like a goodbye gathering with one of our friends, and she brought her kids, and then we hired, it was like a mad science lab or something like that, and he came and he did science experiments in our living room, and it was kind of like a goodbye party as we were leaving Windsor. So that's just kind of the background of it. Do you remember anything else? Like, what's the highlight, let's say, from Jeddah, from living in Jeddah? Or one highlight from that time, what was something that stands out? Or, it doesn't even have to be like a specific memory, but maybe just like, specific activities that
Oh
you
yeah,
remember.
like activity. Yeah, it's really helped. Like in Jeddah, we used to have these diving slash boat trips every few months. That was a highlight for me, where we would gather a bunch of people, a bunch of brothers like from the community. We would all rent the boat for a day for up to 12 to 16 hours, and we'd leave after Fajr Salah. We go out to the boat, and we go out into the ocean, like into the Red Sea. And we used to go on these diving trips, have food throughout the day, go barbecue, go snorkeling, go scuba diving, have experience, do some spearfishing, do some like, line fishing. And that was a fun experience that I had when I was that young. It's I don't think many people got to experience that, and I think that because we had the freedom as homeschoolers and whatnot, it really helped to, broaden what we could do with our time and our experience, right?
Because we didn't have to be in school. So we could kind of
Exactly. And
do
that
our
trip,
own
and
thing.
that trip, it really worked out better to be on weekdays at some points, because, it might not be as crowded, or it might be better for the renting, or it might be whatever, like whatever X reason, like there might be. It was always somehow, it could be more favorable towards people who didn't have some sort of commitment to like regular school, right?
Mm.
And I can also see this like in UAE. We used to do these homeschooling groups where we would go, we would go out, we would go ice skating, and you could ice skate at certain times of day when everyone else was in school, and it really pays off because it's just a homeschooling group, all like an ice rink, and
And
if it
taking
was
advantage of
during
the
normal hours, it would have been more expensive, it would have been more crowded, it would have been, yeah.
So kind of taking advantage of that. I think many of my friends and many of the moms might know you as a Lego guy. So can you tell us more about
Uh,
that? What has been your experience with Legos? That was a passion.
Legos were my, yeah, passion, go-to thing. It was my comfort toy, comfort activity, all throughout the day. I have pictures to show as well. Um, Basically, ever since I was, let's say, 6 years old, since before we left Canada till about 14, 15, I played Legos a crazy amount. Where the fact is, like, my room in each of these locations was filled with Lego from the floor to the ceiling. It was only just, let's say, two beds for me, for my brother, and then a table with the Legos on it, and then Legos on the floor. It was a full experience, and really, that was my thing. That was my toy, and it was really fun. I enjoyed it. It was something that I enjoyed doing, and it was a passion. Like, because of Legos, I wanted to initially build things. I wanted to become a construction builder. I wanted to build bricks. I wanted to build houses, and then that was where my head process was. And to this day, I still enjoy that process of building things and forming structures, and that was something that I enjoyed heavily as a kid. And I feel like it was a very good anchor to fall upon, especially because, let's say, if you're moving places, or it was like my de-stress activity, right? Let's say, because Legos were constant. I had Legos in Canada. We brought them to UAE, and then sometimes we would buy Legos in Bosnia if we had the chance, right? And it was always Legos were, a part of my identity, like to a point, right?
Mm.
And I feel like, especially nowadays, I'm realizing how important that was for me to develop as a person, because I'm seeing kids nowadays, especially some of my siblings who might be on a tablet or computer, right? And I remember when I was that age, I really was not on any computer or tablet. I might have played some, video games here or there with my dad, but it was just Legos all day throughout. It was my activity. It was serene. It wasn't a social media device. It wasn't really detrimental to me. It was a very solitude type activity. There's no, let's say, no way for negative influence to seep into it, which I found to be very valuable, right?
And we really, we really went with it. Like, we buy basically, like, all your Eid gifts were Legos. Anybody that from the family wanted to bring, it was always Lego.
That was all I was obsessed. That was all I liked to do, right? So if I didn't get Legos, I'd be like, do you even know who I am? It was really.
And I did get some, and this is, for the moms out there, I did get some comments from some relatives, like, but isn't he like a little bit obsessed? Like, shouldn't you buy him something else? My brother in particular was worried. He's like, but all he does is just play with Legos, and like, why don't you buy him a truck or something? Why don't you, steer his interest?
It was to the point where like my toy collection was never diverse. It was just Lego, Lego, Lego. It was never like, oh yeah, I have some toy cars, I have some toy dinosaurs. At some point, I did have those, but after that, it was just Legos all. I never really had any other toys.
We really went with the passion, we really went, and we expanded it over the years. Like, you would get books and you would copy stuff from the books and you would build things, and for me as a mom, like, it was really interesting to see whatever would happen in his life, he would kind of play it out in Legos. Like, he would build it, like he would. That was interesting to me.
That is very true. I used to look at anything I would see in real life and I would build upon it or build it itself. I remember when we flew from Canada to UAE, or flew from Canada to Jeddah initially, I built the airport. I built the airplanes. I built this travel scheme. When we came to Jeddah, I built the hospital. I built these certain things about the beach that I saw. I built, different aspects of my life whenever I saw them. I always look for inspiration.
When you mentioned the diving trip, I think I have pictures of you like doing like a shark reef Lego theme.
Yeah. I actually had this scuba diving type of Lego set where they had like scuba tanks with like the oxygen and all that kind of stuff, and it was really like sort of like reflecting on my life, right? And if I watched a certain type of media, if I watched a movie or TV show or some cartoon, or I would see something new, I would see a museum, I would try to like emulate that type of thing in Lego, which I found to be really cool, and I would find inspiration.
Lego, like, it's just a building to it, but it was like a creative expression for you. Like, you were just.
It was a very creative outlet. It was very.
I remember
artsy
you
to an extent.
Lion King, and then you would build like the lion setup, and and that would be your thing. Like, basically everything.
I would build a mountain. Yeah.
So that was kind of cool. Lego stands out. What stands out for me, what I remember, is origami as well for a while. Like,
that was another phase I had. Yeah.
Yeah. So
also, I think it was just very.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go on.
I think, you had a lot of very serious interests. So like, when you would find something interesting, you would really stick with it. Like, so for the Legos, it was like, okay, there was nothing else. It was just the Legos. Or if you would get into the origami building, it would be like origami, like, and so I know a lot of people talk about the kids being balanced. So they want to expose them to different things, but there's nothing wrong with just like following that one thing and digging really deep and, becoming really good at it.
I think that type balance.
You were not really receptive to doing other things. Like, once you had one thing, that was it. Like, you were not really going.
I think the balance aspect as an adult now makes a lot of sense to achieve. But like, I remember like when I was a kid, there was no stopping me. If you wanted me to get off origami or Legos and say, okay, try some new toy. I remember at certain points there would be like an introduction, or like every few years or so, it'd be like some new, okay, how about we try this thing? But in general, it never really stuck, right? It was more like my mind was really fixated on that one thing, and I'm not going to stop until I get satisfied with my results of that origami or like the buildable Lego. I remember like it just allowed me to be free and to have my time, right? Like when I'm doing my own thing, right? So really, there's no stopping that.
Lego was a huge part of our homeschooling, looking back, so we're talking kind of about the good memories. What were just not so good memories? What were some difficult times? Like, do you remember from your perspective as a child, what is the part that you did not like about growing up, or not just homeschooling per se, but even homeschooling or just growing up? What do you find like were difficult times? And how did you feel? Did we deal with it as parents? Did you feel supported, or did you feel you were out on your own? Kind of share some parts of that.
I think every kid will feel bad times in their own right or perspective, and there might be a disconnect between parents and kids in this regard. Where I remember as a kid, there were some certain things I did not like. You know, I'd say I think one of the more bigger, broader points is food, like diet, right? I remember there was a few times where we tried to have a stringent diet of like, we'd have kind of peppers for lunch. We'd have a lot of vegetables. And as a kid who was kind of picky, I really disliked those eras. I was very like rebellious, and it was never something that I enjoyed. But it is beneficial physically, and it's not really a bad thing to do. But from a kid's perspective, it'll really just ruin your image of your parents. But as you grow up, you get over that to an extent, right? And also, it's just, I
You
mean,
were a very picky eater growing up. And I
yeah,
know I get a
very.
lot of moms that are asking me about that. Like, they sometimes share, oh, my child is picky. And then they give me the list of things. And I'm like, oh, you don't know picky. Abdullah was picky. Like,
Oh, I was picky really bad. I remember when I was really young, from 4 to 5 to 6 to 7, back when we were in Canada, that era, I did not like anything. I basically only ate bread, chocolate, and a few other select foods that were probably carbohydrates or probably unhealthy junk food. Really, I
you
could
were
not
very
eat eggs. I
stubborn.
could
Like,
not.
you would
I
not.
remember. I remember to the fact it came to the point where when I was a toddler, I used to eat grapes, apparently, right? But when I grew up, I did not remember that I used to eat grapes, and then I didn't like grapes. So it was really like an odd thing for me to, yeah, it was really bad.
And you were
So I
very
was,
set in your ways. People would say, well, just don't give it to him and he will eventually have to. And you were like, no
I
go.
was
Like,
stubborn.
once you were
There was
set
no
in your
changing it.
way,
Yeah.
there was no changing.
I
But
feel
eventually,
like to establish a point to your kids, forcing them to do something very forcefully, eventually, if not, they can adapt to it, but I believe in the long term, it can eventually turn them off from it and possibly from you, right? Like
mm,
this is what I've seen in my personal experience where where parents force kids to do something that they wish they want to do or they want to like in the first place, right? And sadly, this was one of my lesser uh, pleasurable experiences when I was younger was when we had to Quran school in certain schools where the schooling methods very strict, where the teachers themselves would forcefully pick on kids or forcefully bully and beat kids to accomplish a goal, right? And
mm.
then once that was done, I could see it in myself and others that it's not accomplishing anything. It's more so accomplishing the task of resentment towards the teacher and the material, like which is the Quran, astaghfirullah. But it really wasn't the case where kids would be like, I don't like this, I hate it. Like it messed with them. And then at
Just to
home, the same thing
clarify,
happened.
so we said you never went to school, but you did attend Quran programs. So you and
I did attend the Quran like
in Jeddah.
after class hours, like just for 2, 3 hours. Like that was it
Yeah.
was the after school programs that would happen. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was in Jeddah initially, and then in UAE we did a couple of different Quran programs, and so basically the experience was overall negative. I think that
In
was
general, like there were it all depend really, it's really sad, but teaching method and the method it was enable really mattered. Like if the teachers were good or not, if the teachers had a mentality, if the teachers had a vision, or if they were just, using stuff that they were taught when they were, students, right?
mm,
I felt that really that mattered a lot. And also like the motive behind doing it, right? And anything force fed, it could stick with enough reinforcement, but eventually you will lose your control. You will lose your grip. I'd say like you could enforce your child or someone to do something for up to 18 years, right? But as soon as they have their own freedom or their own like independency, they will do what they wish to do or what they think is right for themselves, right?
or they will,
So it all
they will
depends
do it
on.
in hiding, or they will take it undercover.
Exactly. Yeah, sneaking is a big thing. Like, yeah, it basically like it's a very slippery slope because I think, as a kid, I didn't like to be forced too much, and she knows I used to be very stubborn towards any sort of new changes. And if they were to happen, I would not budge at all. And it would cause some conflict, but eventually it would be, you could come to reason, both the kid and the parent. And there's many ways of dealing with it in a kind of productive manner, right?
Mm. So I think the Quran learning has been a negative experience for both of us, like, for us as parents and for you as a kid. And this is,
It's
something that
more like, yeah, it's
know
more like a
uh,
force meets an immovable object. Yeah, it's
because
really rough on both
there was
parties.
a lot of pressure in the community to teach the kids at a young age. And, we took a very relaxed approach towards every other subject. I'm an unschooler at heart, so we really, we had no issues if Abdullah was reading late, if he was not doing math every day, we were cool with all that. But the Quran was sort of, there was that pressure, like, okay, you got to do Quran when a child is young, you got to push them, you got to teach them, and so we learned then by trial and error that doesn't really work. And especially that, many of the Quran teachers are maybe good huffaz, but they're not very good educators, and so they didn't really have a proper way of bringing that subject. So I know a lot of moms are struggling with the sort of, okay, I have a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 7-year-old, 10-year-old that's resisting the Quran instruction, and we've been through all that, and so we've just really realized, so what was the end result of that? What have we done with it? How did our Quran struggles end? Let's put it out there. So you were program from like a 6 years of age, I want to say, since from the time when we moved to Jeddah.
Yeah, well, I started 7, I'd say more like it, because 7 was when we did very basic juz amma at home, just first 20 or so, surahs, and then 7 or so is when I started the qaida, which is the alif ba ta tha. That's when I did the Quran school at first, right? So 7 till maybe, I want to say the age of let's say 16, I think was the age.
I think when you officially quit, you were 15. I think that was
yeah, that was when high school started. That's when the focus really changed. I feel like it really. I finished about 20 juz of the Quran from juz amma like onward. So I finished up to juz 11 from Baqarah, right? Like that period of ajza. It really, I believe, it was hindered, especially due to some of the travel. This is where the point of school comes in, where for my schooling, I didn't really feel affected by the travel or the moving or the new environment, the new teachers, the new people that you have. But with the Quran school, it really it was affected, especially when you were to move from a superior program to a less superior program. I remember the one in Jeddah that I had was a very decent program where I started when I was 7, and I ended when I was around 12 or so, or maybe about 11. And in that 3 to 4 years, I finished about 12 juz of the Quran, which is a fairly decent amount. And then I went to Canada for a bit. We finished some more there, and then we moved to UAE. UAE, some of the programs were lacking in the same efficiency as ones that were in Saudi. So we did trial and error a few schools here and there. One of the schools was very lax. It was not very strict. It was very easygoing, where enforcement was not a thing, where you could just show up, not do any work, and you would still go on with your day. And I believe that's now just a scam. They're taking your money, and you're just not gaining anything. But basically, more trial and error happened. We would see different schools, and some are better than others, some were worse. But overall, it was negatively reinforced throughout, where the teachers were the ones lacking in quality, right? And at a certain point, I felt that I've put so much effort into this, and yet the results are not as beneficial as I would have liked. So
and I think
it came to a point.
Myth, and I think this is, the one myth I want to point out, that Quran learning is quick and painless. That
Quran
it is
learning, exact opposite.
So I think
it really
felt very lonely that journey, because
I think it's
seems
also
like everybody else is memorizing Quran in like 2-3 years, and we were like doing it for years, and it felt like,
I feel like that's a really unrealistic expectation, because you never know what's going on behind the scenes, right? It's really it varies so vastly from person to person, right? I knew some of these people back in Jeddah, where it was 3 brothers, and they all finished the Quran within, I believe, 5 years, right? It was they were ages like 14, 12, and like 9, right? MashaAllah, they really grinded hard for that, and they really accomplished that. But at home, I don't think the family life was that good, and there was an expectation of their father to accomplish it, right? And really, I don't know how their relationship is with the Quran, right? I can't really judge, but it's not my place to judge. It's just, there's really a step process to this, right? And you might hear, mashallah, someone finished the Quran in 3 years, but you don't know what motivated that or how it was done. I remember in one of the schools I was at, there were kids who finished at an astonishing rate, like they did 5 pages per day. But the part people don't see is the downsides of how that was done. He might have finished the Quran in maybe 2 years, but he did 5 pages per day. But now his retention is very weak. It wasn't a long process. And we actually learned I talked to him personally, and his motivation was that he was so sick and tired of the school. He realized to himself that the only way to get out of this, he told himself, bad place, was to finish the Quran as fast as he could, to
So he was
leave,
done with it.
like to leave the torture. That is what he practically said, right? And I felt like, wow, yeah, I mean, I can get that perspective, especially if the kids are treated differently. And also, like in Quran schools, I've noticed there's a lot of racism that happens between all types of races, no matter who you are. And teachers are all different anyway, and they might have professional treatment. It really varies from person to person, right? So
A lot of
I feel
bullying,
like to have
a
this,
lot of racism.
a lot of
So all
bullying
the
is
good
really
things
bad. And
we avoided by not putting you in school, they all rear their ugly head in the Quran.
sort of. It's
That, and this
and
is a lesson for all the moms as well, because for me, I felt like, okay, I know what I'm doing here educationally, but then for Quran, the narrative
it's
is
like
always,
basically like you
kids.
might plan or try so hard to avoid something, but then it might not happen anyway. Yeah, it happens like that.
So
Where,
that was
for
kind of our
instance,
experience.
like also like in the Quran school scape, you would be many crowds of people, but I noticed myself there's like two crowds of people. It was either kids who were not in school, so they weren't doing any homeschooling. It was just like regular kids, but their parents put them in Quran school to occupy them or to keep them babysat while they worked.
Mm.
Others where they put them in Quran school because their logic behind it was, okay, my kid is misbehaving. My kid does not have akhlaq. My kid is lacking. He's a mischievous kid, or he's not acting the way we want him to, right? So they put him in Quran school as a way, okay, Quran school, Islamic school, it's
It's
the
supposed
same
to
thing,
fix it.
correct? No, it was meant to be a fix, and these kids really were really detrimental to the whole system, because you would have these kids who were vile. I've seen some of the most evil things I've seen done amongst kids were done in Quran schools, which is really a shame to say, but that really was the case. The bullying, the slander, the backbiting, like the speech, it really was vulgar, right? And you would then have the kids who are put in there because their parents wanted them to, or they actually even had a passion for themselves, who wanted to accomplish the Quran, right? But really, like when you mix all these people together and you're given a school environment, it really is nothing
So
is
part
nothing
of
but
that
not beneficial.
experience, looking back, do you think it would have helped if we had approached Quran the same way we approached the other subjects? If we had,
Personally, I believe so, and that's how I intend to go about it, inshallah, with my future family. I really believe the Quran is an important part that plays in our lives and like in a Muslim's life as well. I plan to take a really not relaxed approach, but a more approach that is just more free. That's not rigid. That's not structural. It's not,
you
finish
have
by
to
a certain point,
memorize
or you
certain
have
thing
to
by a certain
accomplish, or
age?
you have to, or it's more like a you have to memorize because we want you to, or because the dean requires you to, or because XYZ reason. But if it's done in an encouraging manner, and I believe for anything in real life, for anything in life to do is to lead by example, right? So I recently talked to a person who said that they finished Quran when they were 17 and they started when they were 6 or 7. So it took them 10, 11 years, which is in Quran memorization terms, a long time for many people who go to Quran school, who are in the Quran sphere. They finish within up to 5 years max, right? But 10, 11 years is a really long time to accomplish the hifz, right? But this person, the approach they took was very relaxed because they would choose their own way of memorization. They would choose which juz they want to start from. They would choose their program. They would choose with their parents or their teacher, and they would have a very sheltered way of learning. They would learn freely, and they would learn along with their other education as well, right? And I found that to be a very inspiring to learn Quran because, instead of going to Quran school as a rigid routine for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years to try to get it all out as fast as possible, I feel like this relaxed approach would be really beneficial to someone to try to achieve, right? Because it doesn't put as much pressure on the kid, and it's in general actually it's been proven psychologically that um the more the if you learn stuff over a longer time period, the better you retain it, right? That's why kids who learn the Quran in 2 years, they might memorize five pages a day, but those 5 pages are very fresh, they're very new, they're not really embedded into your brain, right? And I see this firsthand of people who've done the speed run through the Quran, and they would do it, but then you would talk to them in 3 months, and they'd say, "Well, I've forgotten 5 juz because it was so fresh, so new." I talked to someone who's been steadily adding a few pages over 10 years or so, and their retention will probably be crazy good, right? So I believe that there's a different
And,
method to do it that is way more
we
beneficial.
have learned by example, we have learned through you and your brother and, your younger sister and things like that. So we are now approaching things differently with the younger children. We have 6 children. So our approach has also changed because I think, there was a lot of pressure coming from the community, and us not being Arabs, us not being, kind of almost being like converts to the religion. It felt like, okay, but everybody is saying, get your kid to memorize young. Everybody's saying, put them in a Quran school. And now I wish really, we would have approached it kind of differently, like we did with all the other subject, more relaxed and more as part of our life. So I think that was, a difficult period managing that kind of, expectation. And I think many families are facing the same thing. Many families are wondering, well, how come my kid is resisting? Isn't this supposed to be easy? And I want to have more of these real conversations. Like, with part of my mommy group, we have these conversations of, what does real life feel like? How does it really look like in Muslim families? And this was kind of, our difficulty that we dealt with. I think, as far as growing up, I think that was probably, the biggest regrets we as parents have, that we put you guys through that kind of experience. And then we eventually had to back off and kind of let you be. But yeah, so that's kind of that. What was your favorite educational experience? Like, when was something that you feel like you benefited from a lot, like that when you look back, you say, okay, that was great. Like, I wish, we would have done more of that, or this was great. Like, this really prepared me, or this really helped me.
I feel like it's hard to pinpoint an exact experience that prepared me. I've sort of just come by through accumulation of a bunch of experiences like throughout my past.
Maybe just the freedom to be who you are. Maybe just like the
I feel like
development
that
of your
plays a
own
big
thing.
part where it's like you're not confined to some system, right? Like that confined to a system really changes the outcome that could possibly be, right? So I feel like a lot of experiences that normal people, people who are in school will not be able to have. Let's say, for instance, when I stayed in Bosnia for 2 months to learn German for a bit. So I took an intensive course back in 2018. And I was in grade 11 to learn German. It was a 2-month intensive course, and I stayed alone by myself in a house with my uncle for about a month or so. And that for me was a really interesting experience because it allowed me to free myself, be independent at a younger age, and to learn new experiences, to learn to use public transport, to learn to be the outside world, to learn to be independent. I would go to the gym. I would use public transport. I use the tram. I use the bus. I use XYZ material. I would talk to people. I would engage within the community. I would be there present. And my uncle would occasionally, he would live in the house, but I would make my own food. It was really a learning experience that I found to be very valid for myself because that prepared me to live independently, to go to university. And I feel like that really showed me what the real world could be or what it is like, right? And
How
as
old were
an
you?
introvert person,
How old
I
were you
was
when this was happening?
17, I believe.
Okay, so 16.
I was yeah, let's say 2018, yes, 17 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that
And
experience,
that experience,
being independent, I think that was really helpful. And this is
that
something
was like, for me, it
because of
was like a
homeschooling.
world, it was a wide opening view because, I never had that before. I had my independent moments in life where I was given to like babysit kids, which I found to be really nice, but it also gave me the freedom to be alone, right? Which as an introvert, I value a lot. And I would just be at the course for 4 hours a day, then get back from there, use public transport, go to the gym, get back late in the day around 3, 4 p.m., shower, and then study from then till evening, have dinner, and then repeat again. And the weekend, do some activities. And
So
it was a
basically,
really interesting
a chance of
experience.
being an adult, right? Like it kind of.
Basically, yeah, it was really freeing. Like it really, like the constraints of being a kid weren't felt anymore, right? And I feel like some kids might have that feeling that they're trapped in a family or like in a small kid environment or a small kid mentality
You're
that
not given enough responsibility, maybe.
I did feel that to an extent. So I feel like in university, I feel really accomplished and free. I feel a lot better than I did when I was younger. But it's more also because of growing up, and understanding, and I think also it's like maturing plays a very big part in that, right? Seeing the hindsight, seeing how things progress, and seeing what you can accomplish or what you can become, right?
So as in a background, from my philosophy, and some of the mommies know that already, we're big believers in keeping the kids as long as possible, like sheltering them as much as we
Oh yeah,
can,
I agree.
keeping them play with the Legos as much as you can, be a kid. But then once you're kind of old enough, then you kind of switch into that adult mode. So give you responsibility to be an adult, like, give
I
you
feel like there should be a very
not
good
waste
mix of
too
both,
much,
right?
not waste too much time on that teenage years, because I think the teenage years are sort of problematic because teenagers are like basically adults with no responsibility, and the parents are trying to treat them like little kids. And I think that's where the conflict comes from with most parents and teenagers, because teenagers just would like to like be on their own, be independent, and do things, and then they don't have a chance because everybody's treating them like a little kid. So part of our push to for you to do that, to have that independent moment, was because we wanted you to experience that independence, wanted you to kind of be mature and be on your own and be responsible. We had the same plans for your brother, but now due to COVID it's kind of on hold. So he's 16, maybe we'll get to have him do that next year. Let's see how it goes, inshallah. So that was an interesting thing, which actually brings us to the next topic, about siblings. You're the oldest in a family of 6. So how did that work out? Or, were there moments of siblings rivalry, or how did you feel being the oldest?
Oh, many.
So just to reassure all the moms, there's always going to be issues between siblings. Okay.
I will be honest, especially now in hindsight, being 19, turning 20 in 6 months or so, that I was a vile child. I was a vile sibling. There's many stories. I stepped on my baby brother when he was 3 months old. I stepped on him physically. I was only 3 or so. Yeah, a lot of stories like that happened. A lot of jealousy. I've had a rivalry with my brother. Um, my childhood, let's say, like ever, I was fine until my brother was born, and since then it's all just been downhill. It's all just been a downfall of fighting for my rights.
For 3 years, and ever since then it's been going downhill. More people being added, every couple of years, right?
But it's I also realize now that as I'm older that I really was not a good big brother, right? I realized that I lacked a lot of. I was responsible to the extent, but I really lacked the maturity to be a better person or the bigger person, or to treat them with respect, or to care for them in a loving manner. I cared for them, physically. I would feed them, of course. I would take care of them. I washed them, like when they needed to go to the bathroom. I did these sort of things, but emotionally, I really wasn't vacant or available, which I feel like now I feel bad about as I'm older, because uh, having an older big brother who's not accommodating to yourself is not good. It's not nice. It's very mean.
Yeah, but you were a young kid yourself, so you didn't have the emotional capacity
that is
to realize
true.
that.
And I feel like, yeah, especially when the age gap is very small, only 3 years, you exist in that same bubble or space. And my brother and I would fight about games, about certain things, about the Legos and all these things that we have.
About everything. There was not a single thing you didn't fight about. So, and I think
Always some argument.
that's just part of the family life. And, so that's just to reassure all the other moms who are thinking, okay, what's wrong? Why are my kids fighting? I think that's just part of the process.
That is, I think it's a normal
like you
human
said,
process.
my life went down the drain the second he was born. So there was nothing really he did. It was just, the fact.
Listen, some things you can't find a reason for. Some things are psychologically there, biologically. It just happens like that. It's like an innate like response, right? I really don't have a way to explain it, but
humans are, right? So
basically, like there's not any way to.
You mentioned your brother. You have 4 younger sisters. Okay, so you were quite responsible. When there was a point, where we had lots of little kids, and you were the oldest. So brother, we kind of had like a buddy system going on. You would be responsible for one of your sisters, the other one for the other sister. How do you feel like your upbringing was different as a boy from the girls? Like, was there a difference in the way we raised you guys as boys and compared to the girls in the family, or has it been pretty much the same? Or do you feel like the rules were the same or different from your perspective?
I really never noticed much of that because, first of all, when I was younger, I didn't really care that much. I just was on my own business. How I was raised, I think, was fairly normal. I was introduced to, toys and whatnot and things like that, and the curriculum. For me, at least, I didn't notice any much difference. I think some of the girls could say maybe differently, but I feel like technologically, techno technological as well. Technology-wise, I mean, it's also different. Like I grew up with not any devices. The first iPad I ever saw in my life was when I was like 9 years old, and I was like, wow, this is a new device, and it was the first generation iPad, right?
Mm.
Compared to nowadays, they're going up on iPad XYZ, iPad 10. Like it's really like the times have changed, right? But in terms of upbringing, in terms of growing up, the difference between boys and girls, I mean, it's just a combination of personality and who the person is, right? Like
So
my
more
sister
personality
had
thing rather than a gender.
more personal. It's really not gender. I feel like the gendering thing also is really forced down throats. Like in the psychology class I took in university, they talked about gender is enforced psychologically to an extent where a boy might take a darker colored toy than a lighter color like pink, but really at the end of the day, it's really not much proof to substantiate that evidence. That gendered things matter at all that much, right? I mean, as long as you cater towards personality and how they flourish, I think is important. Like I remember my eldest, as his sister, she used to play with toys and tanks and little army figurines, and she would shoot people.
Very
I mean,
physical.
that's really
She's
like
very into sports.
very physical. She very into sports. She does taekwondo. She does all these things. I think a normal, nice little girl would not do, right? I feel like it's very boyish things to do, right? But she's still normal. She's still a girl. She's still who she is, and it doesn't really detract from who she is as a person or her. I mean, yeah, it's sort of like
Yeah.
that.
So do you feel like, we were making different rules for boys and girls, like in terms of like boys were
No,
allowed
it was
certain things, or
just
we made you do the
it
chores the same
doesn't.
way, or
I listen. I really was a lot different. Like I used to clean. I can cook some things. I feel like not many boys are taught to do that, but I did anyway. I just taught how to do it. And in general, I actually like being clean. So I actually enjoy cleaning to an extent. I clean almost daily something. I clean my room, clean a little corner. I clean this. It's a little wet. I'm
you
always
guys basically
little
didn't get a
clean
free pass
freak.
at just being boys, and you have sisters,
Oh no,
brother.
I feel like also this aspect of where the responsibilities are delayed to a certain gender for certain things, like where girls are always relegated to the cleaning role or doing the dishes or even doing the cooking, despite let's say them having an older brother. I feel like is very convoluted, right? Like I've seen some families from my friends as well where they might be the older sibling, but their sister who's 9, 10 years old, she can't really handle much, but she's all of a sudden doing the cleaning after dinner. She's helping with the dishes. And meanwhile, the boy is just, playing there, playing games. He's hanging out, he's watching TV. He's not really involved in that process. And I feel like that's very, uh, it's not right in a sense, right? I feel like to split apart duties like that based on the gender is not, not really
You can help
beneficial to
yourself,
either
and you should be
parties.
part of the family regardless if you're a boy or girl.
Exactly. It's just more of a responsibility and role to upkeep. It doesn't really matter on the gender or not, right?
Okay. Again, you just kind of leading into the next question, regarding personalities, so how does it feel to be an introvert, right? You already said you're an introvert in an extrovert family, because most of us are
Oh, it can be rough, especially when there's a misunderstanding between parents and children upon who is who, right? I feel like for some of
It
my
took us a
younger
long time to
childhood
figure
self,
you out. It took us a long
I felt angry a lot of the time for no reason. Now I know why. Of course, it's been uh, not proven scientifically, but it's been proven through anecdotal evidence. How I feel and how I interact with people and how my batteries charge. How I feel in certain environments, right? And I realized, that I really like my alone time. I like having my own space, being organized, being in a certain environment while I lived in a completely different one, right? So living with five other siblings, two parents, and just, let's say at first there's only one or two siblings and it kept adding on every few years, a new person, new person, new person. And
and very
at some
extroverted
point
parents
now,
that like to entertain and have a lot of people.
exactly. And we
That was
had
very
lots of
stressful
guests
for
over.
you.
We would have gatherings, we would plan things, we'd organize, we'd go out, we'd have these trips that we planned, like a boating trip, right? We'd have these sort of things that, guests and people, right? I, for a lot of it, I enjoyed some of it, but to a certain point, it really got annoying, and I just felt really fed up to the point where I can't take anymore. Like there's a lot of stuff going on, and I don't enjoy any of it, and it's like torturous to a point, where I'd say it's like imagine for a person who likes to socialize, right? Who likes people, who likes to have friends, and they can't talk to a friend for weeks, months at a time, where they're like in not in solitary confinement, but almost the equivalent of that in their own life, right? I feel like the exact equivalent applies to an introvert, who's surrounded by people 24/7, right? If they don't have their own space, their own time, their own freedom, their own alone time to read, relax, sleep, or eat, it really can affect them in a way, where they don't have time or even a chance to like to blow off steam, right?
So I think that was a lot of conflict that we had, with you, because, we expected you to, just fit in into our life, and then you would, you would not.
I felt like that was really evident, especially when we would have certain guests over, and I was expected to interact or be present, and I felt the complete opposite. I was stubborn to the point where I didn't want to interact with guests. I didn't want to see them at the home. I would sometimes make comments, like when are they leaving or when are they, so, which is very rude, but that's how I felt as a kid at the time. I was like, can they please go home now? I'm tired. It's like 11 p.m. at night and I want to go sleep. I want to have some snacks. I want to have my own time to myself, and
so, and this I think comes up in a lot of families. It comes off as like the child being disrespectful, right? Like it could come across as like the child being like.
I understand that as an adult now, that it really is the most disrespectful thing that can seem possible. I remember I had some really bad moments in my own childhood, but also as an introvert was a kid.
I think it was a really took us a while.
It was a personality trait. It was who you are. Like you cannot really control who you are. Like if someone told you to change overnight, you cannot, right? You can adapt and overcome obstacles, but to ask someone to change their nature to accommodate for something they don't want to do, I feel like it's a really difficult task, and
I think
just puts more pressure.
Kind of realized that this is really like you're not just being angry for no reason, like and this is
for no reason.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like this is, I think a lot of times parents just kind of wonder, well, what's wrong with my kid? Why is he so rude? Why is he so disrespectful? There is always a reason. There's always something, and so it took us a while to kind of.
There's always underlying tone. Yeah.
So it's kind of like, okay, so then we kind of would say like, okay, can you come and just say salam to the guests, but then you can be excused and go to your room. You don't have to hang out there with them. You know what I'm saying? Or we would kind of say, okay, you don't have to come with us for certain outings, what I'm saying, just to kind of make that space. But it is difficult. And I think, this is what you're saying, like, to pay attention to the kid's personality, because that can make them or break. And same thing, like, for example, with your sister, she's very extroverted. She's very active, very social. So like, if we are asking her to just be quiet and not talk, and she cannot really change her nature, like that's oppressive to her. So we kind of have to, deal with her and let her be who she is. And I think that's a big, huge part of parenting, just like, listening to your kid, who they are. And sometimes you don't know, I think, it's a learning experience. You get this kid. And this is, I always tell the moms, parent the kid that's in front of you. Like, look at the kid that's in front of you, not some ideal kid you wish you had. And this is how you imagine you're going to parent him. But like, look at the kid that's in front of you. And when you were born, I mean,
I feel like
struggled because
chasing ideals is not the way to go about it, right? I feel like as a 19-year-old now, I know that feeling of wanting your kid to, let's say, when I want to have kids, inshallah, one day, I want to maybe influence my kid to pursue something, like pursue a career, or pursue something that I want to do or want him to achieve, right? That's where a lot of real life stories are coming to this, where you've had parents who influence their kids to play sports or to play athletics, to go into some career, to go into becoming an actor, an engineer, doctor, like all these career paths, and they want their ideal child. They want to fulfill the image in their head that they've created of what they want their child to be, right? And I feel like this is the most wrong way to go about it, because you should allow your kid to flourish as who they are and who they choose to be, right? Like, my father's like in the medical field, right? I'm pretty sure he would love to see me work in the hospital alongside with him or in the same department, but really I cannot stand the hospital. It is completely against with every fiber of my being, I really cannot stand to work in medical field, or even learn about the medical field, or even be within the vicinity of a hospital or ward where there's patients in, right? It's not for me, right? And also the same applies now. If I wanted to influence my kids to take into aviation, or to become a pilot, or to build with Legos, right? They might be completely against that idea, right? It's not my job to influence them to be, how I want them to be, right? You can enforce certain values that you value yourself, which you think are important. Like, let's say, if you want them to be well-versed academically, if you want them to accomplish something that you think is a important goal, but don't mold them into ideal you, or to an idea that you created, I think, that you think is the perfect child. I feel like to chase this,
it can be done through force, and then that kid,
and the results can be really detrimental. It can be the opposite of what you wanted. And I feel like if you really help in giving them the freedom and helping them flourish their own personality and who they want to become, I feel the result will be even better than the idea that you created, right?
Yeah, because they're going to be able to be themselves. And this is actually, Allah creates each one of us with a specific fitra. And, we cannot say one is better than the other. Like, we're needed everywhere. Like, the different types of people are needed everywhere. But I think it's just, looking at that kid, and especially if the kid is different than you, it's like kind of like, okay, how do I go about this? And, what if I don't know? So it's like, really, I keep talking about this, my classes, come alongside the child, see what the child is interested in. Sit there with them, explore who they are, what they want to do. So that's kind of, so basically just kind of look more at the personality or not. The next question is kind of in regards to religion, as far as like Islamic learning. What was your experience growing up, and how do you feel about that as a grown up now? Like, do you feel like we were forcing things down your throat? Do you feel there was a structure? Do you feel it was just kind of like, hey, do whatever you want? What was kind of your feedback on that time? Because a lot of moms worry, like, if they don't force the kids to pray, if they don't force the kids to, fast and these kind of things, they think they will never come around to it. Or
I feel like that is the worst way. I think that's not a good way to go about it at all. I feel like, again, I'll say this, that it is best to lead by example. I feel like as a child, that is especially like even psychologically proven that between certain age ranges, that is when they're most susceptible to role models, right? You can meet many people who said, they're influenced or they look up to XYZ person. And because of that person from their childhood, even they want to become something in their own life, right? And I feel like being an active role model and just emulating the actions that you wish to influence on your kids is one of the best ways to do it, I feel like. Because, you can see many examples of, a small toddler praying next to his father. He doesn't know how to pray, but he's imitating the exact movements that his dad does, like in sujood and ruku and standing and, Allahu Akbar and saying takbir, and all these things. And I feel like being that example can really provide a positive influence. And I also don't think force feeding people things is a way to go about it, because at a certain point it becomes disconnected from their life. It's not that, it is a part of their life. It's more like, oh, this is something that we have to put up with in our life, right? It's if you have, I've had this example of someone I know where, they have daily time to practice hadith, right? And I can see them within the kids, it's more like, it's not that, oh yeah, the hadith are part of their everyday life. It's more like, okay, we know every day at this time we do a hadith, and it's just something that we have to do. It's nothing that, is a part of them. It's more like a task, a chore, right? I feel like if it's structured, I feel like structure is important, but to influence it in that way can be bad for the kid, because it's not really life. It's more just like, oh yeah, it's something we have to put up with. Like, it's more like when there's a saying I saw when I was younger. Islam should not revolve around your life. Your life should revolve around Islam, right? Because if Islam is just a little teeny thing that that you put in here and you force it at this moment in time or at this moment in your life, and that is what you have to put up with, it can become a nuisance instead of something that is going to be beneficial to them.
Like you're living your life and now all of a sudden you're go do something.
It's all of a sudden, it's like, exactly, it's like you're living a life and all of a sudden, oh, we have to go pray now. It's like, that is the response that is not wanted at all. You do not want to be living your life and all of a sudden, okay guys, a lot of time, and the kid responds, oh, prayer. And it's that is, subhanAllah, it's like really.
A lot of moms, they're kind of confused how to introduce prayer, how to like kind of, make little.
I feel like it doesn't have to be done at an early age, but it should be.
Your experience with prayer, for example, like, how was that? Do you remember?
I started, I don't remember much. It's it's a long time ago, but for sure my prayer wasn't forced, for sure. Like I was told, to be responsible, and that I have a new responsibility upon myself when I was around 10 years old, just before 10, take prayer, seriously. And around 10, 11 is when Islamically I was growing up into a more independent person where, I would guard my aura. I would pray all the time. I would make sure that I'm on time with things, and I would be, it was, for me at least, I felt empowered because it was a new responsibility. It wasn't I was a kid anymore, but I was actually doing what the adults were doing, right? I was, had my privacy,
step, like level up kind of.
It was a next step, basically, right? And it was introduced slowly, and it wasn't enforced. And I feel like you have to give a kid space to, be a kid. And I feel one of the biggest issues is to forcefully mature a kid, and that is just
To
It
force
might work in the short term,
her.
to force them to mature, to force them to learn something, to force them to be obedient, to force them to be, not kids in the sense of the fact, right, where, kids act around, they play around, they jump around, they, like they're hyper, they talk, they laugh, they play. And if you force them to be mature or respectful or to be a certain mannerisms or to be a certain way at a younger age, I don't think it will help them in the long run, because it's just, they lose their childhood. They
Mm,
really miss out on a lot of things, and it ends up just, making them more resentful in the future because they're
yeah,
living
lots
this
of
path.
resentment. I remember one of
My example, like in the Western world, is where I look at it, a kid who's an actor, right? A child who's an actor is thrusted into a life that they didn't really choose themselves, and they really have to live out this life that, their parents chose for them. And it's nothing to do with Islam, but it's really like the way they're forced to live the life, and they lose out on their childhood that could have been. They lose out on a normal childhood, on a beneficial childhood, and they're mentally not well. Any kid who is a child actor or a child like celebrity that they have in the West, really nowadays is really messed up. Drugs, abuse, things. It's really not a path to go on, and that can be applied to the same principle of, forcing someone to do things when they're younger and to craft them, right? To craft a child by hand, right? But if you let them, get molded by natural occurrences, by the daily life, by the weather, it can be more natural, right?
Mm. I remember because I used to host these parenting meetings for many years, and this was back in Canada. You were about 7 or maybe 6, turning 7, something like that, and we were about to pray Maghrib, and and all the sisters are getting ready to pray, and then one of them, she looked at me, and because you were playing around, you were just running around, and between the whole thing, and then she looked at me and she's like, "Well, aren't you going to make him pray?" Because she looked at you like as being of age, right? And I looked at her and I said, actually, no. And I'm like, and if I was going to make him pray right now in front of everybody, it would be more just to prove to you guys what a great mom I am, and that I'm making him pray in Jama'ah, like, oh, wow, look at my son, rather than you actually retaining anything from the prayer and having any benefit from it. And you would actually probably resist it even more, right? Like, because
I
you
would
don't
resist
want to
it.
be the,
I'm thinking now, like you told me about the story, I'm thinking myself back then, I would have been stubborn. I would have been maybe humiliated because there's people watching and they want me to do something in front of them. And I
yeah,
feel
you
like
would have been,
the outcome
and
would not have
I would
worked.
have been at the same time then embarrassed, like, oh, look, my kid doesn't want to pray and he's embarrassing me. So a lot
And
of
it
times,
looks bad for both parties. Yeah.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. And so a lot of times when we get that kind of resistance, the question is always why the resistance? It's not there for no reason. So if the child is resisting, they're resisting for a reason. I remember another story. You used to visit your grandma on the weekends, and you were really young. You were maybe 4 or 5, something like that. And mashallah, tabarakallah, she would pray her salat, and she would put you next to her to pray. And you, because you were a bit scared and you were a bit intimidated, because you were there whole day long at their house, right? As you would listen to her, like you would pray everything she was praying. I mean, you were just copying the movements, and she would pray Dhuhr like 10 rakats, 4 rakats sunnah, and then fard, and her stuff, and it would be a really long prayer. And then she would come home and she would be like, oh wow, Abdullah was really great today, he prayed with me all salat. But then you would have a huge meltdown, and you would be like done, like because you were so good
That is, yeah,
at their
it's
house, you know
just
what
a
I'm saying?
fear tactic. It's
And
just,
so I
yeah.
used to tell her then, just like, he is 4 or 5 years old, just let him be, let him play while you're praying, let him play. He sees that you're praying, he will pick up on it, like, don't worry about it. So I think, this is a lot of questions we get, from the moms, how do I teach Islamic values? How do I, teach my kid about something? How do I enforce it? I think the message is here, just to kind of not force, and not to force the maturity at a young age, because I think Islam gives us a lot of freedom in that regard. I wanted to ask you about discipline and punishments and growing up. What kind of rules were there? Like, do you feel like, we were going after you guys, and, what were the consequences for misbehavior? And because, we have lots of stories of you giving us a bit of a hard time, so can you share with us how that was dealt with? Because a lot of moms are struggling at the same, a lot of households are struggling. Well, if I don't discipline my kid, they will grow up to be absolutely disrespectful. They will grow up to not know any rules. So can you share more about that?
I think discipline is a strong word, and I think people mean many different things by discipline. To answer the elephant in the room, beating is not an option. I don't believe in beating myself. And I feel like I've seen firsthand from my peers and my friends at younger ages, how beating can affect them. And really, it's really roll of the dice in that manner, where you might beat someone and potentially they can turn up to be functioning human beings to an extent where it didn't affect them or even traumatize them, right? And I've seen it happen. I've seen kids who were beaten, but in most cases it ends up bad, where it ends up causing more disrupt and more distrust between the parent and the child, where I know instances where the kid and the father have a terrible relationship, where the kid now is just escaping the father, avoiding him, waiting for him to travel, waiting until he's asleep, waiting until he leaves for work, and he would do whatever he wants, and he would dissipate every corner where he had the chance to, right? And it was really, and the kid is fine. The kid is not an evil kid. It's just that the opportunity that he was in, the chance, the place he was at was not very good for him. His dad would beat him. His dad would scold him. His dad would abuse him, and it really didn't help him at all in the long run. And I feel
you might get like a short-term fear. You might get like a short-term
possibly, but in the long run, it turns into hate. It turns into resentment.
So how did we deal with you? Like, do you have any memories?
I feel like having a firm hand, not in the physical sense, but being firm on what you value, and showing your kid that you have power, and not being afraid of public humiliation. Because I feel like now, I think one of the best examples of this is how my siblings and I have been not trained, but how we were taught at a younger age that when we go to stores, right, and we see things that we might be enticed by. And this is, I feel like, the biggest for shopping at toys or going to the toy aisle at Walmart or any store that you have here in UAE, where a kid might be like, "Oh, I want this, I want that toy, please give it to me, please," and he would make a fuss, right? He would start crying or whining, and he would make And I've seen this happen in real life at real stores where kids would do this sort of behavior, and parents would eventually get so embarrassed by their crying and whining, and they would just give in to the child, and they would give them whatever they wanted, right? And
or they like beat them and yell at them, like that's
or they beat them. Yeah, either those are the only options that they enforced, right? But for me, how it happened, I don't remember when the last time I begged was, because it really stuck with me that you can't really get things at the store that you want, because that's how life is, right? It's just a learned fact that you had to live with, right? And it was really enforced by okay, when we're at the store, you just say no. You say no, you cannot have that, right? And I've seen it happen with my younger siblings, where they might want a certain toy, might want a certain doll, a certain house set, certain thing, and my parents say, "Oh, you can't have that," or "That's not possible." And they're like, "No," and they actually sprawl out at Carrefour on the floor, laying down, whining, and you have to drag them along, and it's kind of loud. There's people around, like giving you looks and stares, but really, like it's none of their business, and it's the most beneficial way to show the child, you don't care what reaction they give. It's just a no. Like, you have the power in that dynamic. You cannot succumb to the wits of your children. And I feel like this is one of the aspects of instilling like akhlaq within your kids, right? To instill mannerisms. And again, also the example comes where kids learn by imitating, right? So if your mannerisms are nice and good and exemplary, your children should follow suit, right? And
they will eventually learn.
Eventually follow suit. They
Not in
eventually
the
learn.
moment.
Yeah, no, not in the moment. I feel like it's impossible. It's always these things take X amount of time. Like, it's not like if the only behavior a child knows from you is nice and good behavior, the child does not know any other behavior, right? So in general, that's how they will grow up to be. That's how they will be, right? When they're influenced to negative stimuli, when they're influenced to verbal behavior or behavior that is aggressive or rude or mean, or people being angry, then they know that behavior, and they know that that behavior can get results, or that behavior can get reactions, and then they are also influenced by that behavior, and they copy that behavior. That's why I feel like school is such a bad environment for kids, because they learn this behavior from their peers, and teachers don't really enforce any behavior themselves, and school kids end up being some of the vilest children out there, because like regular age school kids can be very mean and rude, right? And I feel like for regular people, like if you're homeschooling, for instance, you don't have that like external factor, and it's best to decrease the amount of influence that you would have on the outside that can affect their worldview, right?
So back to the discipline kind of thing, it's just basically set rules and stick with them. So like
stick with them,
just,
yeah, and like
rinse and repeat,
rinse
and repeat, just kind
rinse and repeat, and also like there's also the part of reinforcement, like, psychologically, right? So negative reinforcement, positive reinforcement, what are you, I feel like also negative reinforcement is not it can be effective in certain scenarios for sure. But I'd say if you prompt them into fear, if using fear mongering, let's say if there's this example that they use in class at my university where if a child was told by his mother that if he didn't do the dishes, he would either get a beating or he would lose the privileges for watching TV for a whole week, right? That would prompt him into, it's basically fear mongering, right? Where,
He's
the
just
child
afraid.
would fear of losing his privileges. It instills a negative tone to their relationship, instills a not so good tone. It's a bad tone. It's like it's like a punishment, or it's a fear of punishment, right? And I feel like in certain areas that can work, but in general, it's better to be more positive about things and to reinforce for good behavior and to discourage bad behavior and to at some moments in time you have no other option but to discipline with a stern voice or stern behavior where you cannot have access to certain things, or this is enough screen time, this is enough of this, you cannot keep eating chocolate, or you cannot, there's many different aspects that can apply to it, right?
But it's
it
basically
should
the
be
parents taking the power back, and like the parents not giving in to every
basically
whim.
not so kind of, I feel like giving in, when you give in, it shows the kids that they have a say and they have power in that dynamic.
Mm.
And once they get a taste of power, they want more and more. It'll never end. They
And they
just
don't take
want
the
to be,
parents seriously.
and
Growing
and
up,
when
I
that
think
happens, yeah.
I think growing up, the biggest issue we had as far as discipline and and enforcing rules and things like that was regarding screen time, for example, right? I think that was a big one, and I think that's what a lot of parents are facing regarding internet use. Of
I
how
think
do
you can
you?
pause for a second. And my device is low on battery. I'm just gonna get a charger. Sorry.
All right, we're just gonna pause the recording for a second.
Charger.
All right, we're back. There was just a break, and we needed a charger. As far as rules and discipline, I think a lot of people are struggling with screen time, with computer use, with video games and things like that. I think those were the moments where we had to enforce some rules, for you guys. And, we were, I think, quite tough in some of these ways. And then, maybe as you got older, the rules have changed a bit. So what kind of rules did we implement for you regarding screen time? Like, do you remember some of the really
Yeah, we would have this one 2-hour rule where you can only play 2 hours of games a day. We would have rules where sometimes you could not use any devices during the whole week, and only during the weekends we could use devices. There were many different trial phases. There's phases where you could control the internet through a device where it would shut off at certain times, that you would not have access to the Wi-Fi for a long part of the day, right? And many different factors played into that, and many different
devices were sometimes locked up?
methods where you locked up in a safe. Yeah. You actually have a device. Yeah.
So sometimes devices were taken out of rotation. Sometimes there would be passwords that you
and
guys were not
and
allowed to use.
exactly, and the main computer would be locked by a password that no one knew, right? So it'd all just be inaccessible, and the TV cable at one point was locked up as well. The
Okay.
TV can be turned on, and a lot of different,
So I think
methods were used.
rather than manage you guys, we were managing the circumstances.
Yeah,
right? Like instead of punishing you, I mean, this was probably you felt it as a punishment, right? But like instead of like, I don't know, physically punishing you, or like, we would rather manage the devices. We would manage the equipment, take it out of sight, and so I don't think you liked it at the time. I don't think the girls like it nowadays, when we say, okay, screen time's done, finished, but that's then the thing, you just kind of have to stick with it. I remember your sister, one time we were out with another friend of ours who also has 6 children, and the little kids were whining and they wanted ice cream. And me and my friend, we just continued our conversation. We just said like, okay, no ice cream. And we just, continued. And the little kids are whining, and, and then eventually they got over it and they started playing something else, right? And then, your sister, she mentioned, to me and the other mom, she's like, yeah, she's like, we can tell you have lots of kids, because she's like, you absolutely don't care that we're making a fuss. Another mom, she might feel embarrassed and she might like, okay, here, I'm going to give you ice cream. But you guys are just like, yeah, no ice cream, end of story. So I think there is something to be said about that, like, just sticking to the rule and just like being firm about it. And there is no real other consequence that you have to enforce. It's just kind of, it is what it is. That's the rule. I think
you just have to enforce the reality where the kid, like, they have no option but to believe it. They don't have any choice in what they say. Like if you say,
Like, that's it. Like, there is the rule. There's nothing you can do about that. Like, we are the ones making the rule. And I think it helps that we are on the same page, like that the parents are on the same page. If you kind of, I remember one time when you were younger, you said something, she's like, you and Baba are like bricks, like just building on top of each other. Like, you know, because you would try to tell him of one version, and then you would try to come tell me something. And we just kept going like, no, ask your Baba, ask your mom. Like, you know, the answer would always be the same. So I think a lot of times kids try to get the parents to give them differing answers.
They try to game the system, yeah.
They try to get, you know, so I think it's just kind of staying firm upon the values or upon the rules that you make. I think that's one of the most important things. And just to kind of be mindful how old the kids are. Like, what kind of rule are you trying to enforce?
It matters a lot according to age, yeah. So younger, older,
particularly
teenagers.
regarding screen time, to like be really mindful that young kids don't need the access. I mean, we have the situation now with our younger kids that they have much more screen time than you ever did. Just because
I also believe I've seen it firsthand. I think that, you know, younger children should definitely not have nearly as much device time that is normal today. I've seen there's this one kid that I saw. He was using a TikTok app, and he was scrolling mindlessly. And the kid is only 3, 4 years old, very young, very impressionable mind. His mind is fresh sand, or is fresh, you know, baking dough for like the cookie mold to go into, right? And he is just scrolling through TikTok, and I was appalled because he is watching the most garbage mush like material. It's not the regular stuff. It's like more of the reality TV-esque material. And this kid is just, his brain is really frying away at watching material.
He
doesn't even know what he's watching, and it's really messing with his perception and everything that he knows of, right? And
so I think
I feel like kids really they don't really need a device in the first place. I feel like there's certain, like, until they're what, 10, 12, like really there's no need for a device. I mean, thankfully the internet can be a decent tool to use, right? But if really you can implement those decent tools without allowing them access with everything else, without giving them a device themselves, you can use online resources, but you cannot, you know, give them freedom with the device, let them watch YouTube freely, let them watch, you know, online things freely. I feel like, you know.
Well, I think, you know, when they're younger, especially, like, you know, I think it's important to have kind of open access to, you know, watch stuff on the big screen in the living room where everybody can see what's going on, you know, to even like.
It's like a shared screen time environment. Yeah.
Yeah. So then the parents kind of know what's going on. And I think a lot of times parents use, like, you know, especially phones nowadays, it's kind of used as a pacifier. Like, the kid is whining, oh, here's your phone.
Give them my phone. Here's the password.
She'll do that. She'll kind of be like, I'm bored. She's whining. And, you know, then I look at her, I'm like, okay, what does that mean? And she's like, well, that means I want your phone. Like, she thinks she's going to be annoying enough that I'm just going to say, okay, here's my phone. Like, okay, just be quiet.
And you say no, and then she wants some more and starts fake crying, but then you just tell her no.
At the end of the day, like, you just don't give it to her. Like, you know, and that's the kind of part, like, you know, you kind of need to get to that part. How about as far as internet access for older kids? Like, you know, what's out there? I don't think most parents realize what's out there, like what kids are up to online, right? Like,
there is a lot of garbage. As far as the garbage is much worse than you imagine. But there's also good on the internet, right? But it's a double-edged sword, right? So I think social media should not be given until later years, until 16 onwards. I got my first social media account when I was 16 and a half, maybe.
How old were you when you got your cell phone, your first smartphone?
I was 17, I believe.
16 and a half.
16 and a half, 17, like before, yeah, around that age. Got my first smartphone, got my first social media account when I was 16 something. It was a Facebook account, and yeah, that's when I got social media and I started, you know, using it a bit. But in general, I think like any kids younger than that, having a social media to use or access is really not good for the development, for mental health in general, for lifestyle. It can really, as I said, you know, young minds are very impressionable, and them being exposed to social media at such young ages not healthy. It really hurts in many different ways that you can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we had issues with Twitter and your younger brother, you know, with some certain occasions and bullying and things getting out of hand. And things
Twitter
like that.
is
I mean, any type of platform, but I think most parents don't even realize what's going on. So if a kid is on their device, most parents don't even know who their kids are following, or, you know.
I feel like nowadays it's more like, oh yeah, he's occupied. The kid is not bothering me. The kid is within his device, his virtual world, right? But in that virtual world, many things can happen. many things can happen, which are
And most
not
parents are just,
not healthy
so
at
I
all.
think, the biggest thing is to sort of know what's going on, to sort of, if you're giving them that device and if you're giving them access to that kind of internet, you got to be part of it. Like, you got to know what's going on.
Be literate on the data, be literate on what's going on, be literate on, what is the world out there? Do you know what they're following? Ask them, what are they, watching? What are their interests in the online sphere, right? It's many different things, right? And just having
I
that
was on
information can
TikTok
really.
last year for about 6 months, and the family would laugh and like, what are you doing on TikTok? And I'm like, I'm doing research. Like, I was there because I had many moms who were telling me their girls are on TikTok and they don't even know what that means. And so I wanted to see for myself, what kind of content do you get to see when you're on TikTok? So I think most parents don't realize the access their kids have. Or I remember one of the families, they were saying, how the daughter only is allowed to have Instagram because Instagram, she cannot chat to anyone. They thought Instagram is just the pictures, right? But they didn't realize that she can send DMs, to other people. And they were like, oh my, like, they were totally surprised. So I think, the parents need to get literate. There is no way around it. Like, and so if the parents always say, well, the gaming time is bad and things like that, you have to figure out what kind of game are you playing. uh, your father was a gamer. He introduced you to games. I didn't quite like that part, right? But I think what kind of reassured me is that he knew what was going on. Like, you know what I'm saying? That he kind of knew what kind of games you guys were playing. We had another mentor, a friend of ours, Kevin, who kind of was there in the online world. So he kind of,
He was gaming as well. Yeah, he knew exactly what each game entailed, and what the communities were like, and what was involved within that game, right?
yeah, and he would sometimes game with you guys. He would be in the game, and I think that kind of made us a bit more comfortable because there was somebody who kind of helping you navigate those worlds. You know what I'm saying? That I think most parents don't even know how to turn on the Xbox or the PS4, PS5. They don't even know how to put the cables together, and so they're letting their kids loose into this virtual world without any supervision. So I think that's then the bigger issue. And there's always fake accounts, there's always other things that kids can be up to. So really it's important to kind of stay on top of these things. Let me see if we have any other questions that we're talking about. Now, when we talk about this gaming and screen and all these kind of things, brings me then to the next question: communication, relationship with the parents. Like, most parents tell me, well, I don't really know how to have a relationship with my kid, or I don't really know how to talk with my kid, or my kid's not talking to me, they're shutting me out, or, how do I? And so what I find from, the mom perspective, I find that the parents just have a certain way where they want the kids to come to them and they want them to meet them in their world. That many parents are not willing to go meet the kids in their world. So what do you think about the parents, and the communication, the relationship, and, how is your relationship with us? I mean, not to brag, or you can be, you can be as honest as, as you can be, but like, how do you feel? Like, what's the key here? What's a good thing?
Communication regarding parents and children. I feel like forcing yourself to have a relationship can be awkward. And I feel like sometimes awkward is the way. Like, I will admit that my relationship with my mother, is a lot better than with my father. And when I have a conversation with him, sometimes like in the car, like especially, conversation can be awkward at times. It's not a regular conversation. There's this aura of awkwardness, like there's some tension within the air, right? But I feel like it's completely normal. And if you can have a free and open relationship like with your children, it can be a really powerful thing. But it's not expected in all relationships. Like, there's certain gaps that can happen between understanding, like especially if parents are older, or if the children grow up differently. Like, there's always a disconnect that can happen, right? Thankfully, I'm blessed, to have parents who are fairly in touch with what I'm in touch with. Like, my dad was a gamer, right? So I used to game. You guys know the internet a bit better than some parents, right? But I also know people whose parents don't use the internet at all, or they don't know how to use Wi-Fi, or they're disconnected from what they do or what they mean, or they don't understand what's going on around themselves, right? And those relationships can be awkward, and I feel like there has to be effort made by both sides. Now, the kids, that's up to them whether or not they want to connect. But I feel like every kid, every child has a sense of belonging, that they want to connect with their parents, right? I mean, they are their parents, right? They're like, after all, like, it's a connection that you need to survive, right? It's a innate connection, where the kid has to have a connection with the parents. Otherwise, you don't have a carer, you don't have a parent, you don't have a caregiver, right? So I feel like to just, involve yourself in their world and to, show them that you care, show them that you value them and what they do, and show them that, that they are important to you as well. And I feel like as a parent, you might have to give more than you receive, right? And I am guilty of this as well, where, my parents, alhamdulillah, give me lots of, gratification and gratitude, but I don't return the favor often, sadly, but it's awkward for me in a way, but I value a lot. Like, it really matters to me a lot. And I wish I could express gratitude more myself, but it's a work in progress. So as a parent, you might feel that you're giving a lot to your children in terms of, of a relationship of communication, of, care, of, growth, of trust, but they're not returning as much in return. And I'm telling you, it's a long process. It takes a long time, but in general, the kid will value you eventually, and they do care for you, even if they don't show it themselves, if they don't verbally say it. There might be other signs that they're giving, right? But I mean, it's very tough
So basically,
process.
there is no instant results. Like,
Nothing instant, no.
And this is, what I tell
It's
mom.
it's not magical where, like, you can give a gift to a kid, or you can give them one nice thing, or you can one day all of a sudden change your routine, or try a new different approach, and you're wondering, well, why hasn't this worked? I'm acting a lot differently today. Why hasn't this picked up? But really, it does not happen like that.
It takes a long time to build a relationship. It cannot come out of nowhere. And the way you build a relationship is through having some similar interests, similarities, and things like that. And I think a lot of times parents just expect the kids to be the ones who are jumping into the adult world, so that they are the ones meeting the parents' expectations rather than the parents kind of jumping into the kids' world. And like I tell the moms, you breastfeed your child, and they're not going to turn around and say, thank you, mama, for doing this. Like, you just do it because it's the right thing to do. Like, it's not just because you expect a certain result and a certain kind of thing to come up. Another thing that has to do with relationship is I want to bring up, and then we're almost finished. We had a lot of questions today, a lot of talking, is the relationship between, the mother and the father. Like, how does that affect the kids? Like, how did our relationship affect you growing up? Like, did you have an idea, if our marriage was in a good state or a bad state? Did we fight around you? How did that shape your upbringing and your worldview? Or, like, kids are usually self-centered, like they don't really care about the world or beyond them. But what I hear from a lot of moms is, like, they sometimes stay in abusive relationships because they don't want the kids to suffer. They want, they're staying because of the kids, but the kids pick up on these kind of things, So how do you think the relationship between the parents affects the child?
I feel like that can give kids a false sense of reality. It can give them an expectation
Something's up with
that.
your sound. I don't think you're.
Hold on, I need to get new headphones. Mine have fortunately died.
Okay, so let's just pause then here for a moment. All right, and we're back. There was a earphone emergency.
All right, yeah, a lot of charging earphone emergencies.
It's all right. So we're talking just about, like, mother-father relationship. Do the kids are they influenced by that? What's your perspective on that growing up? Did you notice our relationship? Did that affect you in any way? Or, like, what kind of messages did you get from that?
I noticed to an effect, but I feel like, every relationship is not sunshine and rainbows, right? It has ups and downs. I remember when I was a kid, you could hear, like, not often, but every so occasion, there might be some disagreement or argument or debate. And that taught me, that, there's disagreements within relationships that happen, and it's all just, wife and husband are supposed to live happily ever after, right? That really, it made me understand, oh yeah, even people who live with each other and are supposed to like each other can actually not like what they want to do, or disagree on a philosophy or something that, they think is right or not. And any number of agreements can happen. Any number of, loss of patience can happen as well. But in general, I don't have much expertise on this because, I don't notice things that much. Emotionally, I am not unavailable. It's just, I don't pick up on cues that easily. So
so you didn't grow up thinking, like, there is something going on in the background?
No, I thankfully not. Thankfully, it was never that. I never had an inkling that, there was something brewing on in the background that I didn't like. I thought it was as how most parents were, right? But I
Mm.
also learned that, when I went to a friend's house or whatnot, I would see that, every family functions a lot differently. Like, how they would communicate. I would see their parents, talk differently, or how they would talk towards their children, and it would affect, certain things. I remember seeing back in Canada one time, went to a family's house, and they were great people, but they communicated in a different fashion, like a lot differently than what I would expect. It was a lot more monotone. It was a lot more straight to the point, and they would, like not show emotion to each other, but it was still effective in a way where I was like, okay, this is a lot different. This is not how I'm used to people talking to each other like this. We're supposed to be married, right?
Mm.
But in general, kids do pick up on things, and I know from reading things online as well, and reading stories that kids do care about what happens in the house and how they do react to it, and they do pick up on it, even if they don't show it. Let's say, like, I remember when I was a kid, I used to snoop around a lot because I'd be playing with toys or I'd be doing a certain thing, but I was always, be in on adult conversations, and I would always pick up on keywords. And parents might not think, that kids being in the room is important or not. Oh, it's fine. He's a kid. He's playing with his toys, or he's, only 8 or 9 years old. But I picked up on many things, and that really, like, those things at that age influence you to think, oh yeah, okay, this is happening, or this is going on, right? And it really
You also don't
affects,
have the full
like,
picture at that age.
don't have a full picture, but this is like you are picking up little bits and pieces, and you're trying to solve the puzzle in your head, and you say, okay, well, this is what I know, so this is how it must be, or this must be it, right? And you could get false images or false flags, right? And you can really, kids do pick up a lot more than you think, and it can be damaging, and they can notice when people don't like each other, when something is off within a relationship, or something is not right, or something is, just a little teensy bit, unwell, right? And I feel like, I don't know, that
Well, I
is like
think
my
the
take on
thing
it.
here is that that you're realizing, okay, the way you grow up, everybody considers that normal because you don't know anything else. Like, the way you grew up,
Your only experience
like the
to
way you
like what
see
like
me
in the
and Baba
household.
being
Yeah.
together, it's like that's what you think it's normal. But then when you see the other family, you realize they handle conflict, they handle disagreements in an entirely different way. And I think that's what causes sometimes marital conflict, is because we grew up with different ideas. Like we grew up, so if you were to get married and your wife's grew up in a different environment, she grew up in a different family, she's going to have a different style of handling things, right? And so I think our
And there's
upbringing,
different
that's
expectations, yeah, and
because you
different
just think
ideas
it's
of how
normal.
things are
You think
done.
like
Yeah.
this is how it is. I remember speaking to a friend, and she says her parents got divorced after 36 years. They got divorced like when she was an adult and when she was married and had a child. And I said, okay, that must be weird. Like, you're a grown woman and your parents are divorced now. And I'm like, how come they got divorced now, like after 36 years? Was there a problem before? Like, I'm just trying to find out. And she's like, well, I never knew there was a problem. She's like, I thought that's just how people are. She's like, my parents, she's like, argued the whole time, but I thought that's just what couples did. And it wasn't until she got married and her husband were like had a peaceful life, she realized, oh my, like that was really quite dysfunctional. So most kids don't realize that it's not normal, whatever they're growing up with. They just think that's the default. And I think that's then why it's so important to give them a healthy upbringing, because they don't know anything else. They just see and they take that for granted. So even if there's abuse, or even if there is emotional, verbal, physical abuse, a lot of times, people are like, well, why didn't you say something? Why did the kid not tell anyone? Because they just think that's normal. They just think that's how everybody is growing up, right? So I think that's the part that's important to just kind of make sure that the kids have something good to look up to. We'll finish off here. I think this has been really long. I don't know if anybody's going to watch this, but let's see. We'll post it and see if people enjoy this conversation. Usually my Zooms are like 2 hours long. So I think if people, can sit through my Zoom, inshallah, they'll be sit through this. This is kind of interesting, I'm hoping. Last question. What are your plans forward? What are you planning to do in your life in the immediate future? And then second part of the question, as far as parenting, do you plan to have kids, and what would you do as a parent? Would you do the same thing, or would you do something differently? Just kind of looking ahead.
Immediate plans, hopefully graduation in 2.5 years.
Inshallah.
Inshallah, that's done. I also work in the meanwhile, work in the summer, work here and there, get a job, accomplish my goals one at a time. In the long term, Kids wise, I believe was the question, and all that kind of
Like if
stuff.
you have a family, and how would you parent your kid?
Yeah, I will take a different approach. I will experiment. I do believe I will stick with the homeschooling route. I feel like that's really valuable, and I don't want to lose that. I feel that's something that I value a lot, and that really would help me flourish, right?
Mm.
Um, Children wise, I'm really unsure. I've not made up my mind yet on that philosophy. I want to have kids, of course, but the number of kids varies because I have seen the big family dynamic. I've seen, five siblings. I've already helped raise like 3 kids myself, so I don't know how much
You
more I
need
can
a little
handle.
break. You need a little
And I
break.
think a lot of kids can be stressful, and yeah, especially if you're working and if you have a career and you have a life and have kids on top of that, and depending on how many kids can make a big difference, right? So
Mm.
at that point, I'm not sure yet, but I plan to have kids. Maybe 2, 3, maybe 5, 6, maybe just 2. I don't know.
Yeah,
I really
life
don't know.
goes.
And you can't really plan for it. Like it's qadar Allah, right? So
Mm. And so definitely, wanting to do the homeschooling thing, so it wasn't such a failure after all.
I just think it's the best way to do it, especially because the school system in the current form is flawed. That's basically it. It's just there's no way it can work in the current format. It might work for some people, but at the end of the day, for the general population, it is detrimental to everyone in most cases, right? Like you always talk about people saying, how high school was the worst time of their life. That is just unnecessary. Like that's not supposed to be a tough time. You're not supposed to go to an army boot camp when you're 14. And it's supposed to be school. You're supposed to learn. You're supposed to get ready for life, right? But people's experiences can be really bad in that regard, right? And I got a taste of Qur'an school, which was pretty bad itself. I can't imagine how regular school was, where it was not a religious environment at all. Like imagine the schools in the West, how they are. They have many more issues in schools here. I mean, I've talked to people in the West, and I've talked to people. They have drugs in school. They have drugs in high school. People did cocaine, weed, and meth like when they're 15 or 16, which I find people drink when they're 14, which subhanAllah, it's a completely different world out there. But
Yeah, and I mean, we have some moms, that are living in the West, and they're seeing that kind of stuff, so I think definitely, there's something to be said about not being part of the school system, regardless of which
I think the school
curriculum.
system, exactly. It
Regardless of
doesn't
which
matter which
curriculum you
curriculum or
pick, or
area.
what you do at home, even if you were to do nothing at home, it
Is
would probably.
infinitely better, because I feel like school, you could learn some things. Of course, you could learn some things in school, but the play that it brings along with it, the society of school itself,
The
is
dynamic
really
of the
bad.
people
The
that are
dynamic, yes,
together,
it's just
the relationships and things like that. That's
it
something.
is like a plague. Yeah, it's not healthy at all for the body or the
And
mind.
then you kind of just pray that the kids kind of come out of it alive, that it doesn't damage them too much, so definitely.
And that's what, and most kids end up surviving. It's a game of survival, right? And a lot of kids do get traumatized, a lot of kids do get abused, a lot of kids do have bad experiences, and it shapes them into the future, which is, in
And
most
we have a
cases,
lot of moms, in our group, that are talking about their growing up experiences through school and childhood, how damaging it was, so we definitely see that part. So this is just kind of meant to be like an encouragement to step out of the system, to kind of do things differently. And, I think a lot of moms were kind of interested to hear, not just from me, but rather from, Exhibit A, from you as an example. And to be honest, for me, I wanted to homeschool. My first idea of homeschooling came when I was about 13. I read the book Free Children of Summerhill, which is like a British boarding school, where the guy kind of had this idea of just letting the kids do whatever. Like it was a boarding school, kind of within the British educational system, but the kids could just do whatever they wanted. And I loved the idea. I just thought like that would be so cool, because what if I actually could do whatever I wanted to, rather than what the teacher are telling me? Because I had lots of interests, I had lots of ideas, and I felt constrained by the school system, because the school is telling me I gotta do X, Y, and Z, but I want to do A, B, C, and I have interest in that area. So I had this idea of alternative education as a teenager, and then, when I got married and, I kind of thought about having my own family, I thought like, that would be really cool, like just to kind of give the kids, but it was really an experiment. Like, I mean, you guys were my guinea pigs. Like I was hoping it would work out. I was having this idea that taking you out of that school system, but there was many times and many years, difficulties were coming up, and, like you said, picky eaters, angry kids, screen time, Qur'an
Conflicts, yeah.
problems, you know what I'm saying? All these kind of things. But I think what I want to convey here, that those are normal experiences. Like, so the fact that you're homeschooling doesn't mean your life will be perfect. But as long as you keep showing up, and as long as
it's not a one fix, one-time solution.
That's what I'm saying. Like, okay, just because
yeah.
I'm homeschooling now, my life will be great. Or if I put my kid in Qur'an school, it's going to be perfect. Or if I do X, Y, and Z, there is no clear recipe, but rather like building that relationship and looking at the kid in front of you and trying to figure each other out. Like, every mom, when she gets her baby, it's like, okay, hello, who are you? And it's a process, figuring things out. And, now when I look at you, like, at 19, you really followed your path. Like, you really followed your path. And we've kind of, the way you were at 3 and the way you are now, it's obviously vastly different because you've developed. But again, at its core, you have always been you. Even at 3 years of age, the personality traits you have now, they were with you when you were 3. Now, they were quite annoying when you were 3, but now they're serving you well. So I think that's just kind of, the message for the moms that might be watching this, or for the parents that might be watching this, to kind of consider parenting to be a long-term journey. Like, it's not like a one day. And even if you have a bad day, and me and you, we had plenty of bad experiences and run-ins and arguments and things like that, but that doesn't define the relationship. That doesn't mean that's going to be the one thing that, okay, that's just how we are, like, because it's a long journey. And I mean, even, in the last 5 years, things have changed drastically, and so like every day kind of changes. So don't give up, basically, to the moms that are watching this. Thank you so much for doing this interview with me. I think the other kids are all interested in doing one. So let's see how it goes.
Maybe I just want to give my apologies, since I might be emotionally cold.
You're not.
I've not done this ever, so I'm unsure how to navigate. Also, my answers might have been kind of rambly, kind of stumblish.
No, I think you were good enough. I mean, we really didn't want this to be scripted. We really wanted this to be.
It wasn't scripted for sure, because my answers were all over the place. So I hope it was coherent to an extent.
I wanted to be like, okay, this is the perfect homeschooling child that you're going to get. No, I just really wanted to be like one of our Zooms that we usually do. Just kind of, one of our conversation when you're over there and we talk about life, and just how things are working out. So just to give moms an idea of what it could be like for them. And, but they still need to look at the kid in front of them rather than ask me, how do I get my kid to be like Abdullah? I don't have any answer for that. Like, you got to look at the kid in front of you and, figure them out, inshallah. All right. Thank you so much for being a guest on my first interview ever. Maybe I'll do more. Nusayba is definitely interested in doing an interview, so maybe I'll do next one with her. Let's see how that goes. Maybe we'll post it. Maybe we'll just keep it on our family archives. Let's see how it goes. All right. Take care, inshallah.
Yalla, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.